Guys, thank you and welcome to our channel Fulcrum Intel Digest, where we discuss all the geopolitical, intelligence, and security matters currently active in our world. I will be your host, Alwyn Swart. I am a senior intelligence analyst and the director of Fulcrum Analytics. And today I'm joined with Brayn Mennie. Brayn, welcome to the channel, and can you please introduce yourself for our viewers?
Thank you so much, Alwyn, and thank you all to all of your viewers and your listeners and who listen to this on a podcast forum. It's a great privilege to be able to sit down and chat with you, Alwyn, and with all of you who are listening and watching this. I'm truly privileged. As Alwyn said, my name is Brayn. I am a senior director in corporate security for a fairly large information technology company. That covers, or certainly my operations cover Europe, the Middle East, and Africa.
Awesome. So, Brayn, like you know, from early February or the end of February this year, Operation Epic Fury started in the Middle East. Now, it is still a vocal point of the satisfaction and some positive views as well in the world today. So, Operation Epic Fury had the four end states, which was, to sum it up, basically to annihilate the Iranian regime's ability to become a nuclear power, to neutralize their ballistic missile supplies and drones, to destroy their navy. So, do you think that the operation and America and Israel initially succeeded in their end state that they started at the beginning of the campaign? And if so, why?
Those are really interesting questions, right? And it's easy to get categoric about end states if one looks to an end state as being the only possible option. So certainly as I view this, right, there's various elements to determining a fairly flexible end state without devolving completely into an Iraq 2003 scenario or an Afghanistan scenario, which does mission creep into the forever war or the 10-year, the generational war, or whatever whenever the instance is. So, sorry, now let me discipline myself to avoid my typical waffle. But if one looks at saying, well, okay, there were military end states, absolutely, right? So if we can say the military end state was to thoroughly degrade Iran's capability of firing rockets and missiles at its neighbors effectively, then yes, you could probably say it has not been eliminated, but a lot of degradation has occurred. I mean, if you look at the UAE as being one of the sort of benchmark examples, I think they've been fired at more than anybody else, including Israel, right? They had a reduction of incoming fire up until the 8th of April when it stopped, of course. But they had a reduction of incoming fire of about 95 or 90 in the upper 90s% from the peak of it, which was the third day of the war, right? And their interception rates, both of inbound ballistic missiles, in fact, of inbound ballistic missiles were incredibly good, of drones, slightly less so, but they were using different interception techniques and all of that. And let's not get too in the weeds with that, but from a military perspective, that sort of result occurs in numerous places. Yes, it absolutely occurs in the interception range and at the sort of terminal end of the target. So the UAE did incredibly well. I can't speak too highly of how they've managed their defensive operations, but it also occurs over target and over the launch area. And I think from that end, the United States and Israel did achieve a great deal of their military goals. They have complete air superiority.
Yes.
Sure, they had an aircraft, or they had quite a few aircraft shot down by their allies. Okay, but they had aircraft that were shot down by the Iranians. They conducted a phenomenally good operation to rescue the pilots. I think that's something that, well, maybe when Netflix changes its political editorial position, they'll make movies about it. But it absolutely, I can't wait to read some books about that, because that is going to go down in history. But you see, I waffle too much here, but they've attained air primacy, in essence, air superiority. They are able to interdict wherever possible the missiles on the ground. They've profoundly addressed the supply chain. They haven't eliminated it completely, but they have absolutely degraded it, right? So from that military perspective, yes, they have. From the addressing of the naval issue, yes, they've made sure that Iran has the largest submarine force of anyone, right? Because that's where all their ships are, being submarines. However, here's the other thing. So from a military perspective, I think they've achieved 2/3 of what they wanted to. I think, this is my own opinion, but I think that there was a very strong hope that the air operations would be a little bit like the Libya model, where it would transpire into more on-the-ground capabilities that they would eventually support with some special forces, and maybe that will still happen. And I think that is a very good strategy to conduct. But I think they expected more on-the-ground activity from local resistance movements. I don't think they quite realized just how badly those organizations were impacted by the Iranian executions and things like that, right? So I think there was a bit of an overestimation there. But coming back to the crux of your question, have they achieved their military goals? Well, yes, I would say about 2/3, because the military goals were to create some sort of reactive component. I don't think it's met within the expected timelines, but we don't know if those were the timelines that they put down, right? Let's also take on board what President Trump or Secretary of War Hegseth and all of those role players say to be their timelines and their wants and wishes. What they're saying is for effect.
Yes.
So one should be cautious of taking things too literally, right?
Absolutely.
Because, and again, if you go and read President Trump's book about the art of the deal, he does specifically mention being a little bit out there to sort of achieve goals, right? So, and that has been a modus operandi of his for some time.
Yes.
So the military actions to shape the negotiations, yes. Are they negotiating? As far as we know. Or is there discontinuity in Iran? There absolutely appears to be, right? Because the Iranian so-called political, civilian governance, their parliament, etc., are saying one thing. They're somewhat at odds with the IRGC. And if you look at things like, I'm not listening to that idiot's tweet and I'm shooting at ships coming through the strait, it does sort of elucidate or allude to a little bit of twists, a little. See, now I'm thinking in Afrikaans, a little bit of a difference of opinion between the power structures there. I would suggest that you can interpret that as being an effect caused by the military actions, and it's a symptom of where they want to go with regards in the erosion of the Iranian capability, the Iranian regime capability, right? It's not happening as fast as people would like to believe that it would happen based on, I don't know what they are basing an assessment of, oh, you can topple a regime in 3 days. You can't, right? Especially not a regime that's been in power now since, what, for 47 years.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's structure and there's ability there that needs time to erode.
Yes.
And short of doing something incredibly drastic, like dropping or conducting your air warfare with nuclear weapons, which they're not going to, or doing a boots on the ground type of invasion, which I don't think they're going to, certainly not in the sort of Normandy, let's invade the beaches and flood the place with our troops sort of thing. I don't think they're going to do that either. I think it's happening. It's a slow boat to turn, right?
Absolutely.
And
I'm so glad that you mentioned the timelines, because that brings me to my next question is, people do not understand the complexity of the operational theater, which is the Middle East. Maybe you can just elaborate or summarize or indicate to the viewers pertaining to the complexities in terms of ethnic lines and norms and standards in there. Now you have a conventional force from the West invading again in an area where they do have experience. But every time any invading force put boots on the ground there, it turned out not really aligned with their original objectives or their timelines, etc., because it's a very complex area in the world.
Yep. You know, we don't have enough time to discuss all of the complexities of the Middle East. And I know this because we could probably sit around a braai for the whole night and discuss that and consume a lot of beers and some Jack Daniels, and we would still not have reached a conclusion. It would be a lot of fun, but we would not have reached a conclusion. And it's kind of like the Middle East, I think, for everyone in South Africa, you might recognize this. It's kind of like the Afrikaans nation, right? Because if you put 12 Afrikaans people on an island and you come back in 3 weeks, you're going to have 15 churches, 5 political parties,
absolutely,
and you're going to have a great trek somewhere on the island as well, right? And that's, I guess that's also a large bit of insight into the Middle East, because you're overlaying so many incredibly powerful forces there. So you have the religious element, which is very powerful. And you have a religious element which is not homogenous. I mean, people look at the Islamic faith and they say, oh, well, that's just all one element to it, but it's not. It's as split up and as bifurcated, sorry, not even bifurcated, trifurcated, multificated as the Christian religion is, right? And again, come back to that little bit of a joke example, right, of having all of these churches, but that's so true of the Middle East. So you have this incredibly powerful motivational force, right, which people commit to in ways that are incredibly fundamental. Okay. And that's something that certainly in the Western perspective, we might have a little bit more insight in South Africa, where we have a lot of experience from my age, and people older than me, a lot of experience in very conservative Christian values, and seeing just how powerful that can be as a motivational force, right? A motivational force in society. And you have that magnified. And you have that scaled up over many millions of people. And it becomes a very unifying or very identifying mechanism to mobilize a lot of people and to create a direction, a societal direction. So that's one element, or one of the elements. Then you have another incredibly powerful factor, and just as powerful as the religion one, which is money, right? And there's a lot of that. And along with the money is the power that is brought by need, because every single person in this world needs what is produced more there than anywhere else, which is the oil, right? And all of the factors that come with the oil, all of the byproducts, down to fertilizer, the LNG, all of the plastics, every element that we use in every facet of our life is touched by what happens in that region. So that region has a lot of power and influence far beyond its borders. And couple that with the other societal elements. And then let's also add in the third, or a third factor, is they are as tribal in the Middle East as we are in South Africa, right? Because and certainly, I mean, there used to be this expression when I was working in Afghanistan was, in Afghanistan, understand that it is me against my brothers and I against the rest of our clan or the rest of our village against the neighboring village, our tribe against the next tribe, and our tribes, and then our tribes collectively against the world. And that is very much a sort of microcosmic perspective of what you look at when you look at the Middle East, or the Arabic world, which again is not truly strictly correct to say the Iranian element into that because they're not, or they do have an element of the Arabic tribes within their borders, but they have a great deal of other cultures as well. And the tribal differentiation there is something that is very difficult for the West to understand, because even though the Western people are also tribal people, if you look at Europe and you follow its history, you have the Celts, the Germanics, the Goths, the Visigoths. All of those differentiations have been diluted, right? They've been diluted because so many people have moved collectively to other places or have intermingled, intermarried, and have generally, whilst still maintaining various parts of their identity, have diffused it far away from where it will become a crux for violence. Whereas in the Arabic cultures or the cultures in the Middle East, those tribals and also the sort of whole sort of Southeast Asia area, Southwest Asia area, those tribal differentiations have real world impacts, right?
Yes.
People
Yes.
will go to war. They'll have a fight. They'll kill each other about tribal differences. In that instance, there's still quite a bit of that in South Africa, right?
Yes.
Or in Southern Africa, in Africa in general. And we see it. We see it with the xenophobic attacks in South Africa. We see it with, just how people live and don't get along in various instances, right? So it's something that you and I and all of us in Southern Africa would probably look at with a little bit more instinctive understanding than somebody would in in Europe, because someone from the Netherlands, a Dutchman, and a German might not like each other for various historic things, but they're not going to kill each other, right? Or go and have a pitched battle with each other, except at football, unless there's some really good reason, like football, right? But you get where I'm going.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it's not as divisive um, as it is there. And I think when you factor all of those together, right, you'll have this incredibly complex strata. So to come back to answer the other part of your question, why would something like a boots on the ground invasion not work? Certainly by a US force or an Israeli force or some sort of combination of or even a NATO force with Brits and other European countries involved in that. It's because it's going to now overlay yet another whole series of complex motivational issues, which is going to absolutely diffuse or absolutely create as much confusion there as it did in Afghanistan or in Iraq, right, to a lesser degree. I think if you were to look at it from a military solution perspective or a on the ground perspective, I think the best strategy to follow would be to be a little bit more like Afghanistan was initially planned as being, where you had local forces with air assets, small groups of special forces on the ground doing the coordination, managing the supply chain and all of that. I think that should be one approach if they want to do it in that manner, or that they should ask their Gulf partners to do it.
Absolutely. And speaking about the Gulf, we know that we have already established that there's a lot of money in that region, and affluent nations, like use an example like Dubai, were at the blunt force of the attacks. And if you look at rhetoric on social media, people sometimes may get it out of proportion pertaining to attacks there. The sentiment can be that the region is not safe. Other people staying in Dubai can say, no, but it's safe. It's the best that we've performed yet. And there's still less incidents and crime and death and slaughter here than it is in other parts of the world, which is normal for them. Now, if this operation still continues and talks do not reach a certain conclusion, how do you think would it impact other countries in the region, especially those that is affluent and more aligned towards Western norms and values?
Oh, let me unpolish my crystal ball. Firstly, how the talk's going, I have no idea, right? But what I would say is this, let's try and be practical. from a military point of view, let's reverse the perspective. What can Iran do to the UAE, right, to Dubai or Saudi Arabia, more than what it's already doing? So how can it project military capability to those nations? Well, it can shoot missiles and drones, and we've already seen that whilst having a great psychological impact, has very little actual impact. Okay, Kuwait slightly different, but I think the whole sort of the mathematics around missiles and things played a little bit more in their favor there, and also there was a lot more military activity, which is why Kuwait didn't sort of bounce back to reopening their airports and things like that as quickly. But let's not get too in the weeds on that. So what can Iran do to the Gulf nations more than what it's doing already? It can shoot more missiles and shoot more drones. Okay, will that create more effect? If you shoot more, the math says that some will get through.
Yes, absolutely.
Will that have fundamental change? It shouldn't. Will it impact business? Yes, because it plays on a psychological factor, which is already proven somewhat effective. But that yes is a short-term yes, because businesses will adapt.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Businesses will change the way they do things. They will say, well, okay, we just need to tough things out, or we just need to accept this new reality, and it will change and shift. Okay, because as any good crisis manager knows, the first part of the crisis is how do I get back to normal? Then the second part of the crisis is, okay, how do I adjust to the new normal?
Yes.
Okay. And that is also the evolution of states, right? And that's what's going to happen. So those sort of things will have a far shorter impact. It has the ability to use the Strait of Hormuz and potentially use its connections with the Houthis to try and hit and other choke points, etc. But those two will also be shorter term elements to it, because at some point they're going to create sufficient disruption where they will attract a profound military response, which they won't be able to deal with.
Yes.
Okay. Whether it be by the Gulf militaries, which are incredibly capable and have been showing immense restraint, because I think strategically the Gulf countries focuses on business, and they'll use their military as an extension of business, whereas the Western countries use their military as an extension of politics.
Yes.
Okay, and then I think there's subtle differences to that. I'm not trying to indicate that the Gulf nations are mercenary, but I'm just saying they're very practical, and they're not going to commit their military forces unless, quite frankly, unless they know that they're going to improve their overall position from a business perspective, right? And certainly from their own prestige perspective and all of those. But I think the business element to that is the one that drives their motivation the most. And again, this is just my opinion. But what I would say is that how will it affect the security situation in the Middle East is, again, there'll be a short period of disruption. Things will be done differently, but not that differently, and things will return back to business, because that is the focus, and that's what the host nation wants, right? Or the Gulf nations want, is they want to be that business drive, and they want to get back to what they consider their main focus, which is, having that sort of profitable enterprise life. I think that Iran will also then leverage other elements. It'll have an information warfare aspect to it, because they are very good at that.
Good at it, absolutely.
And that has proven very, very effective. One small example before I come on to the next part of the answer is, you don't need to actually impact the office buildings of a whole bunch of large-scale corporations to create effect. All you do is broadcast a list, shoot 2 drones. Even if they get shot down, you've still created your effect.
Absolutely.
Right? Because they know and understand information warfare. They also know and understand the shortcomings of their opponents, right? So that they know and understand that the Americans have got a political life cycle and a news life cycle and a political reality. That means that their message will get amplified by the political opposition to the current regime exponentially, right? Because right now the biggest cheerleaders that I can see for the IRGC are are leftist American and leftist British politicians, right? Because again, the UK is somewhat microcosmic of the bigger American picture. So the same broader fundamentals that count in the UK as well. So I think that you will see more of that. You'll see more of that better executed. And then the other element to it is the asymmetric warfare. And that I don't think you're going to see in the Gulf. I think the Gulf countries have incredibly good security services, very well-trained police services, and and legal structures which are very used to dealing with terrorist behavior. Asymmetric, by that I mean
Yes.
terrorist activities. Okay. So they have those legal structures, they have the political will, and they have the capability within their security services to very effectively deal with them. Okay, so I think you will see far less of those sort of kinetic asymmetric activities in the Gulf regions because they're not going to be successful. You might see a little bit, right? Absolutely, you will see in the UAE, but I mean, you saw in the UAE just this week how effective they are in being very proactive in dealing with those sort of terrorist groups, and as one can see if you watch the SWAT games and stuff like that, they have a very, very well-trained police force. Okay. Whereas if you look at Western Europe, the legal structure is not very well positioned to deal with those types of events. Some of the security services are very well trained, and some of the police forces are very well trained, but some are not, and some are incredibly poor in their ability to police extremism and terrorism from certain perspectives. Even though they might have an historic capability to deal with terrorism, they fundamentally misunderstand the new capability or the differences between one brand of terrorism versus another brand of terrorism. And politically, they don't have the will to reposition themselves so they can do so. So you will have more of those types of terrorist attacks or asymmetric events, certainly in Western Europe, than you will in the Gulf. And I think you will also see that aligned with more protest actions, right? And a lot more protest actions. And you'll see it also in partnership with some of those groups in Western Europe that have already they've gone along the environmental protest or environmental terrorism or environmental action line, and they have this close or a close partnership with the Islamic extremism groups, and that seems to be growing closer and closer. And so you will have that that sort of homogeny or not homogeny, that sort of cluster of groupings working together, increasing terrorist attacks, such as what we saw in Brize Norton and up in Scotland, and what we've seen in Paris, right? And you'll see far more protest actions designed at large-scale protest actions, and then I think you'll see outsourced terrorism or inspired terrorism again. People being paid to go and burn ambulances or burn synagogues and things like that. And then you're going to see actual terrorism cells conducting directed operations in the more conventional urban terrorism model that we've come to know. So that I absolutely see increasing from where it is. And I think that's going to be a leverage point that Iran will use to try and influence activities back in the Gulf.
Absolutely. Right? Now, speaking about change and elevated activities, there's been some chatter on both open and closed source channels pertaining to a possible regime change in Iran. And if that happens, do you think that the American administration maybe have a good candidate in mind? And what would you think must this candidate look like or be like to be accepted in that region as a new leader and a new law?
Oh, those are difficult questions, right? Has there been a regime change in Iran? I think to an extent there has been, right? I don't think it's gone yet the way that everybody wants it to be, which is an Iran that's overthrowing the IRGC and overthrowing the current government. I don't think it's there yet. I'm hopeful it can get there. Whoever the next leader is, that's not going to be or should not be determined in Washington. They have a very poor track record of trying to insert people, right? And we saw that in Afghanistan. We saw that in Iraq. I think if they want to learn good lessons from that, is to create the environment and let the Iranian people resolve it for themselves. The Iranian people will do know who they want to be their next leader, right? Is it the son of the former Shah? I don't know, right? There's some people that say he does not have very good support on the ground. He seems to have a lot of support in the expatriate community, which is very large, right? I don't know, but I do know that they will accept the ones that they determine, and there must also be patience with us from the rest of the world, because it's not going to be snap in, snap out. This is going to be a little bit of a dirty, messy business, just as Libya was, right? Yes. Okay. Because there's going to be a whole bunch of different groups and different forces at play. And I think the same sort of thing will happen with Iran. I don't think the Americans should or the allies or whatever the oppositional forces, that however you want to determine it, should involve themselves with who the leadership should be. I think they should involve themselves with how can we secure the nuclear material that's still around, and how can we support whoever is going to be the next leader, right? With the understanding that it's going to be a little bit of a messy transition. And it could be that it sees Iran change geographically, right? And maybe that is the answer, right? Maybe a little bit of a, sort of a split a la Soviet Union. Yes, I know the dynamics are a little bit different, but Iran has a massive geography with a lot of different cultural dynamics at play, and maybe that is the answer, right? Or more autonomous regions. So it's a little bit more like Iraq, where you'll elevate the Kurds and then have the Shia and Sunni as that sort of three-way balance for each other. Not that that's 100% successful, but it is at least better than complete anarchy, right? And so those are, I think, are the factors that need to be worked out, but not in a stamp. Okay, that's going to happen from now on, and it'll just be perfect going forward, because it's not. It's going to map itself out, right? And the timeline, I think, for transition, we shouldn't measure in months, right? I think if we want to be realistic, that timeline for transition is going to be measured potentially in decades.
Absolutely. Now, speaking about decades, South Africa has positioned itself in the New World Order as a country at the forefront of change and a player in the global south that wants to be taken seriously. Now, okay, we must also state that the last couple of years, excluding now COVID, South Africa has received a bit of a knock. We know we were on various lists pertaining to corruption watch, pertaining to possible financing of extremism. We know we have extremists operating from South Africa and in South Africa. But why do you think that South Africa, seeing that we are positioned in the global south and the main operation and the theater of operations is in the Middle East, are we still important, or are our voices still important on the global stage?
That's a big question, Alwyn. Are our voices still important? That's one element to it. That is very difficult to answer.
Indeed.
Are our voices still important? I think our voices should be important. I think we've diluted a lot of our voice by shouting and screaming from a governmental perspective, or from some sort of collective perspective in the wrong way. And I think we try as a country to virtue signal too much, and so we undermine ourselves. I think South Africa should pursue a voice for Africa, as opposed to trying to pursue a voice for Iran or BRICS or whatever their other perspective is. I'm not trying to diminish the very real factors that go into global trades and global alliances and all of that. But I think South Africa needs to look into how it, maybe take some examples from Kenya, not that Kenya is perfect, Senegal and those countries, where it says, well, okay, how can I be my best African partner?
Yes.
Right? And in our case, how can I be our best SADC partner? Because if I look at it, right, South Africa has got these amazing opportunities, got these amazing neighbors, which it doesn't treat very well. Right? I mean, South Africa and Namibia should be as close as two brothers, but they're not, right? And they're not because, well, South Africa, quite frankly, treats Namibia a little bit badly, doesn't it? Right? And it now forces Namibia to go and look elsewhere into Asia and places like that for better business partners. Now, granted, Namibia could also do a little bit more and things like that, but I think if there was more seriousness placed on our relationships with Namibia, Angola, Botswana, the DRC, that's a difficult neighbor to have, but, and Mozambique, which is another difficult neighbor to have, right? But if we played a little bit better in our own space, right, at all sorts of levels, not just, governmental corruption. Why does that flow so easily when one talks about South Africa, governmental corruption? Not just governmental cooperation, right? And not just trade treaties and things like that, but at all levels. Why have we not, from a South African perspective, gone and said, okay, I love rugby. I really do. I love rugby. I love watching the sport of rugby, right? I love the fact that South Africa is so good at it. And I love the fact that we're the world champions and we're the best in the world. And I love the fact that we can attract 40, 50,000 people to a schools match. I love all of those things about it. It's a cultural movement as much as it is a sport. Why have we not gone and created, as South Africans, been more ambassadorial about that element of our culture with all of our SADC neighbors? Right? Yes. Not just, yes, but, some of your players come and play in our leagues and we'll go and play against you and beat you 107-0 occasionally and all of that sort of stuff. Not just that, but I'm talking about real growth and sharing of something we're really good at and we found as a movement that works for us, right? Creating the URC League in Africa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's so much skill, and I know it sounds a little trite. Oh, Brayn, you're speaking about sport, and sport is just sport. But I'm sorry, rugby specifically is more than sport. It's a cultural movement in South Africa. It's Absolutely. A unifying factor, which is doing far more than the South African government about bringing South Africans together.
Absolutely.
Okay. So why don't we extrapolate on that in which we are good at into Africa far more than what we are doing right now? We have this tendency to try and position ourselves as a world voice, but not bringing along the other people who can elevate and amplify our own voice. We need to fix our base, right? And I think that's something where we should answer for. We go and expand into BRICS and all of that, but we leave SADC as the sort of poor cousin, and we don't spend enough focus there. Yes, the pickings are slim, but they are slim now because they're underdeveloped. And here's the great thing, Zambia. I mean, Zambia is really taking off. It's really flowing up. Zimbabwe, yes, it's a basket case. It's got a long road to get back to, but it's sort of starting. They could do with more help. Botswana right now is going through some tough times, but there's so much potential in there. Oh, sorry, just on the recent things. Did you see recently the Americans caught a Botswanan ship? I was so tempted to ask, did that come from the Gaborone harbor? Anyway, sorry, all of that aside. No, I think that's where we cloud our own voice, as we try and speak to a world stage instead of saying, where are our strengths, right? Yes. And our strengths are being African,
Yes.
right? It's not about being Russian or Indian or Chinese or Brazilian. It's about our voice. So that's the one part, and I've waffled on at length about that one part. Here's the other part. South Africa has a very profound problem to solve.
Yes.
And that problem is the ANC. It
Yes.
is a corrupt criminal organization with all of the other offshoots that are there because of that corruption. And I want to differentiate the ANC from where it is idealistically, because I have very many friends who are card-carrying members who love that organization for all of the right reasons. And whilst I will disagree with them politically, I absolutely agree with them from a perspective of those are their ideals, and I love the fact that they have them. Okay? However, that organization is different from those ideals, and it has corrupted itself and is corrupting the country, right? That is the problem that we need to solve. And that is a very difficult problem to solve, because we look at it, I think, from one perspective and say, well, how can we solve it? We're going to present a counter, the Democratic Alliance, etc. And that's probably not the right solution for it. There needs to be a different type of solution. I don't know what that solution is, but I know what we're currently doing is not working and resolving the ANC problem, right? Because I think the ANC problem, the corruption problem, underscores every single other problem that we have in South Africa.
Absolutely.
I think if you resolve that, you have a far better chance of eating the rest of the elephant one bite at a time. But
Yes.
you've got to eat that really big chunk first. And
Yes.
it's a big chunk, right? Then the EFF, that's another problem, but that's a smaller problem to resolve. And maybe, who knows, if Julius actually goes to jail, it solves itself. I don't know.
Indeed.
Right.
So speaking about
Yeah.
the ANC, we know the ANC historically has quite a positive sentiment in the world as an organization, as a struggle during the
I'm going to
struggle
differ
years.
with you on that. Sorry. Okay,
Please
I'll
do.
shoot. You
Please,
answer the rest of the question.
No.
I don't think the ANC has a positive sentiment in the rest of the world.
Okay.
I think the ANC's voice is very well amplified by very specific entities in the broader world, and that those entities are positioned to a degree, and I don't want to indulge in conspiracy theory because it is an indulgence, and it's fun to indulge in it, but it's also truth that there is a polarized world.
Yes.
And that
absolutely.
A voice of influence or voices of influence, funded voices of influence, are very powerful in a polarized world, and that the ANC's had its praises sung very well by the left
Yes.
element of the polarized world. But one thing is a little bit interesting, and this is a conspiracy theory in germination here. Okay, no, in seriousness, it's somebody mentioned it to me fairly recently, and I haven't had the great chance to go and unpack it yet. I just haven't had the time. But there seems to be a lot of social media voices, high number following social media voices, which have become very critical of the ANC and the South African government.
Yes.
And I'm really looking forward to some time to sit and go and look at that, because that to me is an indicative shift, right? Or at least a counter to and let's just call it what it is, right? I mean, the ANC is by and large well supported by vocal leftist media sources, which are very well funded. George Soros, but all of those factors. Sorry, other tyrannical financiers of global voices exist. You choose, but no, the jokes and jest aside, before I get taken to court or taken out. I have no suicidal tendencies, by the way, but all of that aside, right? It's it now seems to be that there's a counter, there's a vocal counter opinion coming up, right? A little bit in South Africa, but that's always been there. But outside of South Africa, I think there's there's a lot of voices, and I think it was very interesting that. Sorry, I just need to quickly tell somebody I can't deal with them right now. It was very interesting that those voices, sorry, that those voices seem to be starting to influence policy decisions, certainly in the United States, but elsewhere as well. So I'm very interested to see how it packs out.
Speaking about negative sentiment towards the ANC, you know that in South Africa, after the recent elections, we have this ruling party that has been shrinking in size, and their followers has been lost to other competitive parties, especially, and that it seems that it is indicative that they are losing support. But looking into the future, the next round of elections is nearly up on us. Now, South Africa aligning themselves with the Iranian regime on a global stage. We know they have a shared friendship that spreads over decades. How would you think would this friendship and alignment on a strategic geopolitical foreign policy stage affect the party's votes and numbers in the coming elections?
How would the ANC's alignment with Iran affect their chances? That's interesting. How will it affect the voters' perception of them in South Africa? I don't think very much at all. Right. I think the people who are anti the ANC being in Tehran's back pocket wouldn't vote for the ANC anyway. And the people those are the people who do care about it, and the other people who don't care about it, it's not going to impact them, right? So I don't think it impacts them from a voter sentiment perspective. I think it'll impact them from a financial perspective, right? Because I certainly understand that Iran was a great source of funds for the ANC as an organization. Whether that's true or not, that's certainly my understanding of it. I think the ANC will now be forced to look elsewhere. I'm sure they will get funds elsewhere. Iran, it will absolutely impact the perspectives of how the Western world and the world's leaders look at South Africa, but ANC voters don't really care about that, do they? Right? So I don't think that is going to be a substantive factor in changing the ANC's election dynamics, right? I think it's going to be about delivery, and pocketbook delivery, right? So it's going to be about what impacts in the wallet and how much the ANC's lies are still believed, but what impacts people in the pocket, right? Because that's what the ANC sells, right? Is they sell the handouts, which powerful motivator. It's a good lie. Absolutely. It's kept them in power now for 30 some odd years, but I don't know how much steam that has in, right? Because what's the social grants right now? 350 Rand? What does 350 Rand buy you in South Africa today?
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
More or less, absolutely nothing.
Yeah. So again, right? It's economically not sustainable to have the ANC. But again, economic reality is not always a deciding factor in votes either, right? Yes. It's well, certainly not broader economic reality. It's much shorter term. Yes. What am I getting in my bank account reality? Absolutely. So yeah, I don't think the Iran situation is a big drive. I might be proven wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Again, if the ANC's voters desert the ANC writ large, you will find very few people happier than me. Absolutely. Okay, I just don't think the Iran situation is one that does it.
We are reaching the last question now, and nearly the end of the podcast. But speaking about, let's say, the example like the ANC maybe leaving the government in South Africa, and what that would look like. What do you think would the world in a multipolar polar world look like with the threat of Iran neutralized against Israel and America and a new Iran? How would that dynamic shift the current competitive environment pertaining to Russia, China, and the US going forward?
That is a phenomenally good question. That really is. What would the world look like without Iran? And also, just to bring it back to South Africa, what would it look like with a truly democratic South Africa,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Or a non-corrupt South African government? That's a very that's going to take a little bit more thought and consideration than I could probably do justice to it. But I'll have a little bit of a crack,
All right.
right? So what will it do from a China perspective? Well, I think China's primarily reliance on Iran is for oil, right? So China will make another plan, right? They'll deal with whoever's new in the place, and money talks, right? And China's got a lot of money, so I don't think it impacts profoundly a directional shift in China. Because the directional shift in China, I think the most impactful element or geopolitical thing for China is probably Taiwan, right?
Yes,
So you've got to
absolutely.
say, how does that shape the situation between China and Taiwan? I don't know if it does. Maybe with the Middle East in a calmer space, China might perceive that the Americans would then have more capability to focus militarily on Taiwan.
Yes. Yes.
So, maybe it brings about a little bit of that from a balance perspective. That might shift how China reacts or acts and things like
Absolutely. Absolutely.
that. From a Russia perspective, that's another big one, right? Because does Russia need Iran? Does Russia need the Iran to be as it is right now? I don't know. They don't need Iran for oil, that's for sure. They don't need Iran for resources. Yes, they use Iranian drones, but that's a remote controlled airplane, right? They can bulldoze. It's just cheaper for them to buy from Iran. So I think it minimizes their influence, right? Because I think Russia has influence because of what Iran does, because they influence what Iran does, right?
Yes.
So they can leverage Iran's geopolitical influence on the world, Straits of Bahrain and all of that. So I think it loses them that. I don't think it profoundly affects them any other way. I could be wrong, right? Of course I could be wrong. But I think all of those world forces will just find a new and different way of doing business with whoever takes over Iran. I just think it becomes a money game then. Their businesses, they don't have as good a discount rate. You get where I'm going with their business is different.
Yes.
So that's what I think. And I love the fact of business being the ameliorating factor, because I think it's a very good factor, right? I think the market's very good at getting compromise and getting people to work together when there's profit incentive. So yeah, I think that makes the world a better, safer place the more businesses done. From a South African perspective, how does a true non-corrupt government impact the world? I think it impacts the world because Africa has a lot to offer, and because South Africa, assuming that this new non-corrupt government has sense, would become the true voice of and gateway to Southern Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa or Africa in general, right? And I think that would be South Africa's biggest impact in the world, is to be that amplification for the continent, as well as all of the great stuff it does itself. And getting back, I mean, if you took away all of these artificial constraints and regulation on South African business, therein we can be a massive force for change for Africa as well. If we got
Absolutely.
our business self sorted out, started being this really great producer again, stop with this energy nonsense, which again is scaled back to corruption, right? So if we can sort out those things, again, sort out the ANC problem, and you can sort out all the other problems. But if all of those fall into row, yes, we become a business powerhouse representing a phenomenal resource-rich continent. I think that is what the world could look like. It's going to take a really long time to get there if it does.
Thank you,
Right.
Brayn. Thank you so much.
Anytime, Alwyn.
All right, guys. So this is the end of the episode. I'm Alwyn Swart, Director of Fulcrum Analytics, and that was Mennie. Thank you, Brayn.
Thanks very much, Alwyn. Thanks, everyone.